From the AM/FM 24/7 radio network, broadcasting from AM and FM stations around the country. Welcome to the Small Business Administration award-winning School for Startups Radio, where we talk all things small business and entrepreneurship. Now, here is your host, the guy that believes anyone can be a successful entrepreneur, because entrepreneurship is not about creativity, risk, or passion, Jim Beach.
Welcome back to School for Startups Radio. I hope you're having a great day and using today to somehow make yourself a better person, a better entrepreneur, and someone more likely to succeed. Remember, my favorite piece of advice is to take your remote control and place it underneath a rock 100 times and then throw away the pieces and never watch television again. Very excited to introduce you to my next guest. Do you like that one, Joanne? I think TV is such a waste. My next guest is already laughing along with us, which is very good. Her name is Joanne Lipman, and she has had every job in journalism it seems possible. She started off as a reporter for some small paper called the Wall Street Journal, worked her way up to the editor of Page One, and then editor of the Weekend Journal, and then deputy managing editor. And then she was the founding editor of a Conde Nast publication called Portfolio. And now she has a brand new book coming out from Hyperion. You don't get any more prestigious than that. It's called Strings Attached, and it is I don't know if it's a parenting book, but it's certainly a book on raising children. Joanne, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm excited to learn about you and your book. You know, this is one of my favorite topics because I got 3 kids, 16, 14, and 3. And so I am very much into this. Tell us, what is the thesis of your book, Strings Attached?
Sure. So Strings Attached tells the story of one particular teacher, a quite extraordinary teacher who changed the lives of thousands of students. But in a larger sense, it really is a book about all of us. It's about the mentors that we all have in our own lives. So it tells his story, which is a quite dramatic and quite remarkable story of success and trauma. He had a lot of tragedy in his own background and somehow transformed it into this incredible legacy of success. So it's a kind of a wonderful read. It reads like fiction. But we really thought hard in writing the book about what are the lessons, what can we take away? You know, how do we create a culture of excellence? What can one person do to become a mentor and create excellence in others?
Wow. Okay. I love it. Is it possible to create a culture of excellence? What are your thoughts?
I would believe so. You know, what's interesting about this particular teacher, he was my childhood music teacher. He was a very, very tough teacher, really tough. And this is what's been kind of fascinating. I'll tell you a little bit about the genesis, and then we can talk a little bit about the culture. The genesis of the story was this man was my childhood music teacher in New Jersey, East Brunswick, New Jersey. His name is Melanie Kupchynsky, which we could not pronounce, so we called him Mr. K. Now, he was the toughest teacher ever, literally. He was this Ukrainian immigrant with the big, booming accent. He was the guy who was the orchestra conductor, and he was a guy, if he heard one person playing a wrong note, he would stop the whole group, and he would yell. He would say, "Who is idiot who played wrong notes?" You know, he was the tough guy. And I had lost touch with him after I graduated from high school. And yet, decades later, when I heard that he died, which was just a couple of years ago, it hit me like a ton of bricks that this man changed my life. And that while I had given up the viola, which is the instrument he taught me 25 years earlier, that I used the lessons that he taught me in terms of things like focus and discipline and perseverance. And I use those lessons every day. And by the way, when I went back, I felt compelled to go back for his memorial service, which was a concert performed by some alums. It was going to be this whole concert. I dug my viola out of the closet after 25 years. I felt so compelled that this man had such an impact on me. And I also thought I was a little nuts that I had such a strong reaction to this. But when I went back to that little concert, walked into the rehearsal, I saw 30 years worth of former students who had flown in from every corner of the country who felt just as I did. And we that day put on this memorial concert. When the curtain rose on us, we were the size of the New York Philharmonic. So you see what the impact that one person can have on so many lives.
All right, Joanne, I hate to be the jerk here, but today he would be fired and run out of school for being abusive, wouldn't he?
Well, so yeah, this is the trick, right? He had really, really tough methods, and most of which you couldn't get away with today. Now, certainly no teacher would call a kid an idiot today, and nor would any parent stand for it, including me. But there were other methods that he used in terms of strict discipline, and I can go through. We kind of deconstructed some of his methods, that we can learn from today. I mean, I can give you a few examples. One was, yes.
Please.
One was that he never gave us unearned praise. There was no false praise. In fact, it was very little praise at all. His highest praise was not bad. And if you got a not bad, you went dancing down the street, you went home, you practiced twice as hard because you knew you earned it. And what's so interesting about that is that the latest research that's actually come out since he passed away shows that that's actually right. That the latest research, and there was just something on NPR last week about this, shows that when you overpraise children, it undermines their confidence. And that when you instead encourage them for hard work, it encourages their confidence. They are more confident, and they actually perform better academically when you praise them for hard work. And it was as if he knew that intuitively, and it kind of instilled confidence in the kids. Another big piece of his methodology was he allowed us to fail. Again, something that doesn't happen these days. He had us audition all the time, and sometimes we did well, and sometimes we didn't. But he never focused on the outcome, and he never, ever penalized us for failure, ever. It was all about how will you improve for next time. So the focus was always kind of about how we can do better. And by the way, what he would say to us, he didn't say, listen to me or do what I say. He would say, discipline yourself. He transferred responsibility to us for our own actions. And I think that both of these kinds of things really can translate today, because the bottom line, it wasn't abuse. The bottom line, it was optimism. It was he believed in us. He was conveying to us he believed in us and in our ability to do better, and in our ability to pick ourselves up again when we fail. And we developed those qualities. And I think actually that was one of his former students, who's now a very, very successful musician, said to me, she said the single most important lesson she ever learned in life, she learned in his classroom. And she said, he taught us how to fail and how to pick ourselves back up again afterwards. It's such an important life skill, no matter where you go or what you do.
Well, that is very important, Joanne, especially for all of us entrepreneurs. We are constantly getting told no, and I think the most important skill of an entrepreneur is being able to just let that wash right off your back like a duck and keep on going. So I love this, that he taught everyone to persevere. That is fantastic. Let me ask you this, Joanne. One of the people that wrote a blurb for your book was Amy Chua, who is, of course, the famous author of Tiger Mom, the very controversial book about Asian and certain specific children. Do you believe, as far as Amy does, in how strict a life that her children have had, or do you still believe that getting dirty and playing in the mud is good for kids?
Oh, I'm definitely playing in the mud. I'm definitely in the playing in the mud camp. But this is very interesting. We've been out talking a lot about the book and doing some interviews and readings. And someone in an audience at an event recently made a really interesting distinction between what Mr. K did and what the Tiger Mom approach is. And she was absolutely right. The difference is this. Tiger Mom's approach is my child has to beat your child. My child has to be better than your child. Mr. K's approach was, I want my students to always improve themselves. We were not compared to each other, and it wasn't about beating anyone. It was about improving ourselves. So it was all kind of within ourselves. So I think that it's a very, very crucial distinction. I also think that the qualities that you mentioned earlier are so interesting for entrepreneurship. One of the things we did with Strings Attached is we interviewed a lot of former students, some of whom had gone on to become musicians, but most people like me, most had gone on to become business people and entrepreneurs and doctors and lawyers, and, they'd gone into other professions. But I asked these people, so many of whom came back, dropped everything in their life to come back to pay their respects and to play in this concert. And I said, what was it that he taught you? And the qualities that they told me were exactly the ones that you just mentioned: perseverance, resilience, self-motivation, self-confidence. Those were all those. That is exactly kind of what he instilled in us. And that doesn't come from Tiger Mom. That doesn't come from beating up on the other guy. That comes from within.
Yes, it does. Big, big, big distinction there. All right. Let me ask you this. Was Mr. K loving? You talk about how hard he was. Was he also loving? You said he didn't give much praise. What about other ways of giving love other than praise?
Yeah. That's such a good question. I'm really glad you asked that, because the reason he was effective was not just because he had a big stick. It was because he had a huge heart. And he had a real sense of gratitude to this country. He was born in Ukraine. He had a quite tragic childhood growing up during World War II, and he separated from his parents, and he ended up in these really dreadful refugee camps, and he was on the run from the Nazis and from the communists. I mean, it was a really tumultuous childhood that he overcame to get here. And when he came here to this country, he was 19 years old. He spoke no English. He loved music. He first heard music, violin, played by actually one of the occupying German soldiers in his village, and had fallen in love with music, not just because he had an affinity for music, but because of what it represented. It represented an escape. It represented another world where there was beauty and grace and, so unlike. It transported him away from this death and destruction and chaos that he was living in. And yet he'd never learned music even by the time he got here, because he was always on the run, and he was separated from his parents. And so he gets here at the age of 19, can't speak English, is taken in by a Ukrainian family who invites some other Ukrainian families to meet the new immigrants. And one of the Ukrainians they invited happened to be a college professor in Kentucky, of all places. And this college professor says to him, I'm going to take you back to Kentucky with me. I'm going to make sure you get English lessons. I'm going to make sure you get a college education. And the amazing thing, by some divine twist of fate, this professor happened to be a professor of music who taught the violin. So Mr. K had such gratitude for this country, even with everything that went on with him. And he passed that on to us. So he would do things always. He would take us to perform at nursing homes, at hospitals, and not just play, but he would insist that we stay afterward and circulate with the patients, because he said, they don't see a lot of joy, they don't see a lot of young children, and he actually would say, and you will circulate, and you will like it, is what he used to say. And we did, and it stuck with us to this day.
Joanne, I ran a summer camp back in the 90s at Stanford and MIT, Georgetown, UCLA, a bunch of places like that. And the first week, I only had 19 students at my summer camp. And I was afraid that if I gave an awards ceremony that lasted 3 minutes, gave out 3 awards, that the parents would be PO'd that they had driven from San Francisco all the way to Palo Alto for 3 minutes. And so I decided to give every child an award. And we came up with silly awards, and all 19 kids got an award. And one of the students' parents was actually an education professor and wrote a paper about this, about how wonderful it all was. I think that was the birth of this horrible practice of every child getting an award. What would Mr. K say about that? And every child getting an award, what does it do to your expectations?
Right. So he was the opposite of that award, trophies for everyone kind of culture, totally the opposite of that. And I believe for good reason. I mean, there is research on this too, actually, about the trophies for everyone. And in fact, there was research done very recently on music students, on band students, I think in Michigan. And the researchers followed a group of music students as they auditioned and were placed in, first to last, and in some of them in the lower level bands and whatever. And they wanted to see what was the correlation between placement and self-esteem. That's what they were testing for. And what the researchers found was that the kids' self-esteem was fine. The kids were fine because they didn't want a trophy if they didn't do well. They didn't want that false affirmation. They said that, so the researchers said the kids' self-esteem was fine. The problem was the parents and the teachers. They freaked out about it. So, but our kids are more flexible than I think the culture has been giving them credit for.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Definitely agree with that. Excuse me. What about entrepreneurship? I believe very intrinsically, Joanne, that the bad things that happened to me as a child are what have made me a successful entrepreneur. That I have a chip on my shoulder to prove to those people who picked on me as a kid that I can be successful and do good stuff. And I believe that failure as a kid is great. What do you think?
I agree. Again, when you have failure as a kid, you have trouble as a kid, and you have to figure out how to overcome that, that is a skill you will use for the rest of your life. It's really hard as a parent, and I have kids too, and I have two, you have three. You know what it's like. It's really, when your kid is struggling, it's so hard to watch, and you really want to jump in there and save them so they don't have to experience that. But the fact is that having them navigate those troubles on their own is what that is a skill that they will need and use for the rest of their lives. And I actually had a conversation with a fellow, with a woman I know, who said that and she's a woman now, like in her 50s. So she said that she was she grew up with parents who wanted to protect her at all costs from failure, from distress. And she said that it was the best of intentions, but she said she feels like it's undermined her confidence for the rest of her life. She's afraid to take risks, that she doesn't have confidence in her own judgment. And she's kind of recognizing this, and I think she's trying to do something different with her own children.
Has this changed the way that you're parenting, Joanne? Not necessarily the experience with Mr. K, but the real reliving of Mr. K's lessons after his funeral. Has it changed you?
It has. And in writing Strings Attached, I co-wrote it with Melanie Kupchynsky, who is Mr. K's daughter, who's a violinist with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. And the two of us grew up together. And we tell his story.
Can't hear you, Joanne.
Voices.
Joanne, can't hear you.
Can't hear me?
You dropped out for 10 seconds.
Oh, am I there now? Am I back?
Yep.
Great. I co-wrote with Melanie Kupchynsky, who is the violinist with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. She's Mr. K's daughter. And we wrote in alternating voices. And the experience has changed both of us, in that we really had to think long and hard about what was it that made him effective as an educator. What were the lessons of success that he taught us, that the students have taken with them. And then it made us rethink, between the two of us, we have 5 children, made us rethink how we work with our own kids. And my husband and I have always been very set on having our children kind of navigate their own problems for themselves. Like, we really did our best to not interfere at school and to let them deal with it, for that very reason. But it did really make me kind of rethink the idea. I'm sure I've given more false praise, empty praise than I should have.
Right. Well, I just found it was so much easier just to let them go when they're 4. When you're 4, they're 4, they're done. You've raised that child, Joanne. You can set them out on their own then. You don't have to worry about them after that. Right?
Yeah.
That's so funny because, I was a good kid. I was an easy kid. I was never happy, but I was good for my parents. And I didn't really give them any trauma until I was like 30. And then I gave them as much trauma as they could handle.
Delayed. You were delayed adolescence for them.
Well, it wasn't, it was just life fell apart at 30, and who do you rely on then but your parents? All right, we're about to run out of time, unbelievably. When you say strings attached, what do you mean by that? Obviously, there's the music metaphor, but what are you trying to say? That that we're saying that you shouldn't be too involved and too active in your kid's life. So what does that analogy refer to in your mind?
Oh, yeah, it has multiple meanings. I actually love the title. It has multiple meanings. Of course, he was a string teacher. That's the basic one. But I think that the idea that this was a teacher who launched me and so many students years and years ago, and that many of us had sort of thought we had forgotten about, but realized his influence on us. And I think that the strings, the idea that we are still connected. We're still connected to him. We're still connected to each other. My co-author and I, who had also lost touch for many decades before we reconnected, have reconnected in this wonderful way. And the music, the connection of people who play music together is so strong and something that comes back to you and that we were very fortunate to have. So I think it sort of works on every level of connectedness.
Will you force your children to do things they don't want, like learn the viola?
Well, I did make, my sisters were also students of Mr. K, and the three of us, between us 7 children, and all 7 children were required to take music lessons. They weren't required to stick with it, but one of them has gone on to become a professional French horn player, and the others have stuck with interests in the arts, and, it's really been a great thing for them.
Well, Joanne, we have run out of time. Other than going to Amazon or Barnes & Nobles or their favorite bookseller, how should people reach out to you, circle you, all of that kind of thing?
Sure. So you can get the book in any of those venues. And also there's a website. It's stringsattachedbook.com. And you can get more information. There's some of the music from the book actually is embedded in the site. And also there's a form. If you wanted to reach me, you can actually send me a note. I'd love to hear from you.
Fantastic. Joanne, thank you so much for being with us today and continued great success with the book.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
All right, me too.